I woke up strapped to a surgical table. The anesthesiologist was the woman I left at the altar. She is standing across a hospital family room from the woman she destroyed. 5 years. No contact. No explanation. Just a letter left with a bridesmaid, a chapel in Gloucestershire, and 47 guests who watched her walk away from the best thing she had ever had. And now, Rowan is here. Arms folded, jaw held still by decision, saying nothing. Because she already said the one thing that shattered the silence. I wanted to see if I was fine. A pause that lasts a century. I'm not. Thea has rehearsed this moment in a therapist's chair for 5 years. She knows what she owes. She knows she has no right to ask for anything. She asks anyway. And the only thing more terrifying than Rowan's silence is what comes after it. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I should have known the universe was going to do something like this to me. Not because I believe in karma, specifically, though I have done enough damage in my 29 years to have earned a working theory about how it operates. More because I have always been the kind of person that interesting things happen to. The kind of person who finds the one leaking umbrella at the stand outside the subway, who arrives at the airport gate as the last standby boarding pass is handed to the person in front of her. Who goes in for what her surgeon assures her is a completely routine, laparoscopic procedure, and wakes up on the table to discover that the anesthesiologist assigned to her case is Dr. Rowan Ellery. My ex. Specifically, my ex in the category of women I have loved so thoroughly and so badly that the scar tissue runs deeper than anything a surgeon is going to find with a camera on a rod. My ex in the very particular subcategory of women I left standing at the altar in a chapel in Gloucestershire on a Saturday in May, 5 years ago, in a white dress that cost more than my first car, in front of 47 guests, because I was 24 years old and terrified, and I did the cruelest thing you can do to someone who has handed you their entire heart and trusted you not to drop it. So, there's that. My therapist, Dr. Sasha Osei, I acquired her 3 weeks after the chapel incident, which demonstrates a commitment to dealing with the wreckage I create, would tell you I have made significant progress understanding why I did what I did. She would use words like avoidant attachment and fear of permanence. She would tell you that understanding is not the same as forgiving yourself. She would also tell you that I have spent 5 years in her office talking about Rowan Ellery more than anything else, and that she is not providing this as a comment on my current emotional state. I would tell you, she doesn't need to. I can comment on it myself. But let me start from the beginning. Because if you are going to understand how a woman ends up on an operating table counting backward from 10, while the person she catastrophically failed stares down at her with the composed professional calm of someone who has decided exactly how much of their old life they are willing to let show, you need to know how we got here first. I met Rowan Ellery when I was 22 and she was 31. I want to acknowledge that requires context. I had a degree, a job at a small design studio, a flat share in Bristol. I was not naive. I understood that a 9-year age gap between 2 women in a professional context was something to think about. I was not, at the meeting, particularly thinking about it. I was mostly just trying not to spill the coffee I was holding. She was a registrar, 5th year of medical training, the brutally long hours, that particular quality of focus and exhaustion, where someone is clearly running on less sleep than they should be, and yet their mind is working with a precision that makes you feel slightly inadequate. She was not my doctor. We met at a charity fundraiser, one of those events where you end up standing next to the auction table at 9 in the evening holding a wine you don't need, talking to a woman in a green dress who has just bid successfully on a 2-night stay at a Pembrokeshire cottage and seems mildly startled by her own success. "Did I just spend £300 on a cottage?" she said. "Not quite to me. not quite to herself. "You did," I said. "Though to be fair, it looked nice. There was a photograph." She turned and looked at me properly for the first time, and I became aware of a few things in fairly rapid succession. She had dark hazel eyes and fine lines at the corners that belonged to someone who had smiled often and slept rarely. She was tall, not dramatically, but enough that I was looking up at a slight angle. And she had a quality of settled attention that I would spend the next 2 years studying and trying to name, the sense that she was entirely where she was, not partially present while some other part of her was managing a list elsewhere. The fundraiser was noisy. The room was too warm in the way of charity events. And she looked at me as if the noise and the warmth had nothing to do with either of us. "Rowan Ellery," she said, and put out her hand. "Thea Marsden." I shook it. "Are you planning to use the cottage, or did you just feel pressured by the room?" One corner of her mouth curved. Just one, the left, and briefly. 40% room pressure, 60%. I genuinely do need to sleep somewhere that isn't a hospital on-call room for 2 consecutive nights. She glanced back at the auction table, where the cottage photograph was now adorned with a small sold sticker. "Do you know Pembrokeshire?" "My parents took us there when I was 8. I mostly remember the wind." "That tracks," she said. "It's extremely windy. It's a selling point, actually. Difficult to think about hospital protocols when the wind is trying to remove your face." I laughed. The genuine kind. The slightly surprised kind. And she looked at me like that was a thing she had been quietly hoping for without quite knowing it. We talked for an hour and a half. The fundraiser wound down around us, people filtering out. The auction table getting dismantled. The volunteers beginning the patient work of stacking chairs. We talked about the city and the work we each did and the particular exhaustion and satisfaction of doing something you actually believed in. At some point we had moved from standing to sitting on the edge of a low stage at the back of the room, and my wine was empty, and her water was empty, and neither of us had gone to get more. She told me she had chosen anesthesiology after watching an anesthetist spend 45 minutes talking a severely phobic patient through a procedure with such patience that the patient wept with relief rather than fear. That was the moment she understood the specialty was about being the last voice someone heard before they went under. About being trusted with that. I was thinking about the weight of being someone's last thing before the dark. I was not thinking about how that would land, 5 years later, with her voice above me on an operating table. But here's the thing about retrospect. It is absolutely merciless. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said. I was 22 and had not yet developed the self-regulatory instinct that tells you to wait for more data before asking personal questions. "You can ask," she said, with the composure of someone who reserves judgment on answering until they've heard the question. "Do you find it hard? Being the last voice? Carrying that?" She was quiet for a moment in a way that I later learned was characteristic. She was not slow to think. She simply refused to answer before she was ready to answer honestly. "Sometimes," she said. "But I think difficult things that mean something are better than easy things that don't. So the difficulty is the point, really." I looked at her profile, the clean line of her jaw, the way she was looking at the middle distance as she said it. "That's either very zen or slightly terrifying," I said. "Almost certainly both," she said, and the left corner of her mouth moved again, and that was the moment. Not that I understood it as a moment. I just felt something settle in my chest that had no name yet. The quiet, preliminary landing of something that was going to become significant, whether I gave it permission or not. She texted me 3 days later. My number had been on the business card I'd pressed into her hand, while arguing that if she ever needed a designer for anything in her department's communications, the oat milk clients could spare me. She texted to say she had looked at my studio's portfolio and thought the work was genuinely good, which was a professional opener so paper-thin you could see the other message behind it. I texted back that I had looked her up too, and that her hospital's public communications were an absolute disaster, and she should call me professionally. She texted back a single question mark. I texted back a laughing face. She called me 40 minutes later, not about the communications, and we talked for 2 hours, and at the end of the 2 hours she said, "Would you like to get dinner sometime?" And I said yes, so fast I had to spend several minutes afterward pretending I had considered it. The first dinner was at a small Italian place on Park Street that she had been going to for 3 years, and where they knew her order before she sat down. We were there for 3 hours. I learned she grew up in Edinburgh, only child, parents both academics. She had come south for university and never quite gone back. She told me she ran in the mornings before work, even when work started at 6. I told her I was constitutionally incapable of running voluntarily and did not understand people who did it for reasons other than pursuit. She laughed, the full kind, chin up, eyes creasing, and I filed it away with the same care I gave to things I was not yet ready to admit were precious. 3 weeks of unnamed something, and then she walked me home in the rain, and we stood under the newsagent's awning 2 doors from my flat, and she pushed wet hair off my cheek with 2 fingers and said, "I like you quite a lot, Thea Marsden," as if she had been carrying the sentence in her pocket and had decided this was the right pavement for it. "I like you quite a lot too," I said, profoundly inadequate. I liked her the way you like an open window on the first genuinely warm day of the year, with the physical relief of something arriving that you had not known you needed. She kissed me then, in the rain, under the newsagent's awning, and I want to note for the record that this is an extremely romantic place to be kissed. Tactile and cinematic, and the rain makes everything feel necessary. And I was so thoroughly absorbed in the experience that I did not think about the 9 years between us or the trajectory of her ambitions, or the fact that she was going to become someone whose life required a particular kind of partner. I just thought about the warmth of her mouth and the rain on the back of my neck, and the city going quiet around the 2 of us. That was the beginning. The proper beginning. And for 2 years it was the kind of love that rearranges your interior geography. She worked long hours that got longer. I worked irregular ones. We ate late dinners and read in the same rooms and argued about things worth arguing about. And she had a way of disagreeing with me that felt like being taken seriously. She kept a copy of my favorite novel on her bedside table even though she found the protagonist annoying, because she wanted to understand the part of me that didn't. She told me she loved me on a Tuesday morning in February, standing in her kitchen at 6:15 before a 7 o'clock shift. 6:15 is when there is no performance left. She was in scrubs, coffee steaming between her hands, and she said it the way she said most things, without rehearsal. "I love you," she said. "I thought you should know." I said it back immediately. Also true. Also devastating in retrospect, because I meant every letter of it, every time I said it, from that February morning to the chapel in May 2 years later. The answer to how you can mean something completely and still do what I did, according to Dr. Osei, is that love and fear are not mutually exclusive. They can occupy the same body. What determines which one walks out the door is not the size of what you feel, but the size of what you're running from. What I was running from, if you want the honest version, is the version I've spent 5 years reconstructing from the wreckage of my own actions. It is not simple. Nothing this bad ever is. Rowan, by the 3rd year of us, had passed her final specialist exams. She was Dr. Ellery in every formal sense now, and the trajectory of her career was not going to slow down. She was exceptional at what she did. Not merely competent, not merely skilled, but the kind of practitioner who acquired a reputation quietly, through the specific esteem of other practitioners who know the difference. She was going to move up. She had been approached about a fellowship in Edinburgh, back to the city of her childhood, back to the hospital she had admired since she was a girl. It was temporary, she said. 6 months to a year. She wasn't going to take it without talking to me first. She wanted to know what I thought. I told her she should take it, because she should have. And then I hung up and sat in my flat and thought, for the first time, a small and terrible thought about following someone else's extraordinary trajectory. About being the one who stays or moves, based on where the fellowship goes next. Small, terrible thoughts, once thought, do not unsay themselves. She came back from Edinburgh. We got engaged. She proposed. In a restaurant. With a ring she had commissioned from a jeweler she'd researched for 3 months, because she had overheard me say once that I liked the idea of something specific and not borrowed from trend. The ring was a slender band of white gold with a small gray-green stone, the color of the sea at Pembrokeshire, she said. Because of the first thing I'd told her about a place that meant something. It was the most thoughtful object anyone had ever given me. I wore it for 11 months. The wedding was planned for May, Gloucestershire, a chapel her mother had attended her whole childhood. 47 guests, the full ceremony. I had said yes to all of it. Yes to the chapel, yes to the date, yes to the dress, yes to the vows we wrote together on a Tuesday evening in her kitchen, with her coffee going cold, because she kept forgetting to drink it when she was thinking hard about something. I had said yes with my whole self. Every yes felt real. Every one was real. And then it was the morning of the wedding, and I was in the dressing room at the back of the chapel with my bridesmaid Carrie fastening the last button of my dress. The flowers I had chosen were in my hand, small white things, clean and honest. And Carrie was saying something about how beautiful the chapel looked, about how happy Rowan was going to be when she saw me, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and something inside me went very, very quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, not the 2 hours on a train quiet, or the sleeping next to someone you love quiet. The other kind. The silence that arrives when a part of you has already made a decision and has not yet told the rest of you. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that Carrie stopped talking and looked at my face in the mirror and said, carefully, "Thea?" I said, "I need a minute." She gave me one. I used it to make the worst decision of my life. I did not walk out dramatically. There was no running, no dash down the lane. I handed Carrie the flowers. I told her to tell Rowan I was sorry. I told her I couldn't explain it now, but I would try to explain it later. I told her to please not let anyone follow me because I needed to not be followed right now. And then I walked out of the back of the chapel into a May afternoon that was entirely too beautiful for what I was doing, and I got into my car, and I drove. I did not try to explain it later. That was also a choice I made, though choice implies more agency than I felt at the time. I did not call. I did not write. I left a letter that I have been told by Carrie, who told me because I asked her 6 months later when I had enough distance to ask, was the most heartbreaking and infuriating letter she had ever read, because it explained nothing concrete and apologized for everything without giving Rowan anything to hold on to. I was 24, and I had no words for what I had done because I did not yet understand it. I just knew I had done it. And that the understanding was going to cost years, and that Rowan Ellery was somewhere in Gloucestershire in a white dress being handed a letter by my bridesmaid. The weight of that has been with me every day since. It has been 5 years. I know, through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances that neither of us cultivated but that exists anyway, because the world is not large enough to make a clean break from, that Rowan moved back to Edinburgh briefly after the wedding that wasn't. That she took the fellowship she had not taken before. That she came back south 18 months later, to a different city, London, to a consultant position at St. Anselm's Hospital, which is one of the larger teaching hospitals in the city. I know this because I also live in London now, because I moved for work, Because nobody tells you when you move for work that you should check whether the woman you destroyed is also working in the same city before you sign a lease. I did not know she was at St. Anselm's. I did not know when my GP referred me there, or when the surgical consultant told me 4 weeks ago that the cyst on my left ovary was the kind they prefer to remove, or when the pre-operative nurse confirmed the procedure date. I did not know until the porter was wheeling me down the corridor this morning, and I was watching ceiling tiles pass. I did not know until the anesthetic room door opened, and a woman in surgical greens and a blue cap with dark hazel eyes walked in and looked at my face and went entirely, completely still. I recognized her immediately. That is the thing about a face that has been the architecture of 5 years of guilt dreams. The lines at the corners of her eyes were a little deeper. She carried herself with the authority of a consultant. But her eyes were the same, that layered dark hazel, the particular quality of attention that had made me feel wholly seen every single time it landed on me, and was now making me feel the specific version of seen that involves someone knowing everything you are capable of. She had a clipboard. She was, I understood, with a slow and cascading horror, the anesthesiologist assigned to my case. She had my paperwork in her hand. My name on the top of the form. She had known, minutes, hours, or this morning when she reviewed the list, that Thea Marsden was in this hospital, about to need her. The anesthetic room nurse, young, attentive, entirely oblivious to the geological event she was standing in the middle of, said, "This is Dr. Ellery. She'll be looking after you today." And then stepped back to the equipment and left the two of us to whatever the two of us were going to do with this. Rowan walked to the head of the trolley, stood where the anesthesiologist stands, did what the anesthesiologist does, which was pick up the cannula already placed in my left hand and check the flow with the practiced efficiency of someone who does this many times a week and does it well. She did not look at my face while she did it. She checked the equipment, she checked the chart. She spoke to the nurse about something technical in a low voice that I could hear the register of, but not the words. Professional. Composed. Entirely in control of every visible surface. And then she looked at me. In the 6 seconds before she spoke, I got a very thorough education in what it looks like when someone has spent a long time learning not to feel a particular thing in their face and has not quite finished learning. A long time learning. 5 years of learning. The kind of learning that leaves faint evidence of the effort in the specific flatness around the eyes, the particular quality of a jaw held still by decision rather than ease. "Thea," she said. I cannot tell you everything that was in her voice when she said it. There was the clinical steadiness of Dr. Ellery, the anesthesiologist who does this 20 times a week. There was something underneath that, pressed flat and very still, the way you press a piece of paper under something heavy when you need it not to move. It was not warm. It was not cold. It was the temperature of a decision. "I need you to count backward from 10, she said. The medication was already going in. I could feel the cold of it tracking up my arm, the slight dizzy shift at the edges of my vision. I looked at her face above me, the blue cap, the hazel eyes, the composure that had cost her something, and I knew it. She was not going to let me see how much. 10, I said. She did not look away. 9. The lights above her were very white. The ceiling was very far. The cold was moving up my arm toward my chest with the steady patience of something that has all the time in the world. I had perhaps 7 seconds of consciousness left. I wanted to use them to say something that was worth the years between us, something that landed with the weight it deserved. But I was not fast enough, or brave enough, or perhaps just not sober enough anymore for that. 8, I said. Her face was the last thing I saw. I woke up in recovery with a headache and a morphine warmth, and the distinct sense that I had dreamed about something I couldn't quite retrieve. The recovery nurse, A kind, efficient woman named Della, who kept calling me sweetheart in the most maternal possible way, told me that everything had gone smoothly, the cyst had been removed without complication, the surgeon was very pleased. I would be moved to a ward shortly. I asked, before I could stop myself. The morphine had not yet fully assembled my filters. Was Dr. Ellery? She'll have gone to her next patient, love, Della said, with the practiced completeness of someone who is not going to provide more information than was requested. Is there anything I can get you? Some water? I took the water. I lay in the recovery bay and looked at the ceiling and thought about 8 seconds. About a blue cap and hazel eyes and a voice that had learned to be steady over 5 years of apparently very effective practice. About the face of someone who had been handed an assignment. Here is the woman who destroyed you. Today she needs your professional care. And had walked into that room and done exactly what they said they would do when they agreed to take an oath about first doing no harm. She had been completely professional. She had done her job. She had also, in those 6 seconds before she spoke, shown me something in her expression that I recognized the way you recognize words in a language you used to be fluent in. Fluent, 5 years ago. Before she put the grammar of it in a locked room and posted someone at the door. I was on the ward by 2 in the afternoon. Narrow bed, blue curtains, a window that looked onto a car park. My overnight bag was on the chair. My friend Gemma had brought it. Someone I'd called this morning before the procedure. Someone who did not know the history I was carrying into this building. She had dropped off the bag, extracted a promise that I would text when I was awake, and left with the breezy efficiency of someone who does not have complicated feelings about hospital corridors. I had my phone. I did not text Dr. Osei, though I thought about it. What would I say? I went in for routine surgery, and my anesthesiologist is the woman I left at the altar 5 years ago. I know how that sounds. I know what she would say. I know she would tell me that anxiety is information and not instruction, and that I should notice what my body is doing, and then decide how to respond from a position of choice. I know all of this. I just cannot currently figure out where the choice part starts. The ward was quiet in the early afternoon way, the post-lunch lull where the nurses were busy with documentation and the visitors had not yet started to arrive. I was looking at the ceiling and doing a thorough job of not thinking about anything specific when the curtain moved, and someone stepped through it, and my entire nervous system rearranged itself like a dropped deck of cards. She was in different clothes now, not scrubs. She had finished her morning list evidently, because she was wearing dark trousers and a pale gray top under an open white coat, a lanyard with a consultant's ID. Her hair was down, which it hadn't been in the anesthetic room, and it was shorter than I remembered. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. She was carrying a small paper notes folder. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and there was absolutely nothing happening in the room except us, despite the very real existence of the car park outside the window and the sounds of the ward beyond the curtain. "I'm not your surgical team," she said. The first thing she said. Clearly, as if managing my expectations was the priority. "I'm not here in any official capacity. You are not my patient in any meaningful sense anymore." "Then why are you here?" My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. She looked at the paper folder in her hand. She was not reading it. "Because I have spent 5 years," she said carefully, the way you carry something fragile, "being very sure that if I ever encountered you again, I would be completely fine." A pause. The kind that fills up with all the things no one is saying. I wanted to see if that was true. The room was very quiet. "Is it?" I asked. She looked at me then, fully, with the same attention she had been giving me all those years ago on Park Street, under the newsagent's awning, at 6:15 in the morning with her coffee going cold. That layered quality of presence that had always felt like being entirely arrived at by another person, completely received. "No," she said. Her voice was still level, still the careful calibration of someone maintaining distance from their own interior, but the word had a weight to it that 5 years of practiced steadiness had not quite managed to press flat. Not particularly. She did not say anything else. She nodded once, the brief, precise nod of a woman who has confirmed the information she came for and is now deciding what to do with it. She stepped back through the curtain. She was gone. I lay there with the morphine and the car park window and the blue curtain and the weight of that single word. No, not particularly. Said in the voice of someone who had spent 5 years learning to sound like it didn't matter, and had walked into a hospital ward on her lunch break to discover that all that learning had a very specific limit. I thought about what Dr. Osei says, about the difference between understanding something and knowing what to do with the understanding. I had understood for 5 years what I had done to Rowan. I had understood it with increasing clarity and increasing cost. I had sat in the chair in her North London office and taken it apart, and put it back together and taken it apart again until I could describe every component, every failure point, every moment where I could have chosen differently and did not. I had practiced the understanding the way you practice something you are never going to be good enough at. With effort, and without reward, and with the private knowledge that you are going to keep showing up anyway. What I had not understood, until approximately 4 minutes ago, was that understanding was not the same as being done with it. And Rowan Ellery had just walked back through a blue curtain, and I was lying in a hospital bed with a morphine ache and a scar I was going to have to learn to live with. And she had said not particularly in a voice that was trying so hard to stay level, and the thing that was building in my chest was not only guilt, for once. For the first time in 5 years, it was something else. Something that felt a great deal like the moment before you decide to say a difficult true thing. The moment right before you open your mouth. I pressed the call button and asked the nurse, when she came, how long I would likely be on the ward before discharge. She said until tomorrow morning, most likely. She asked if I needed anything. No, I said. I just needed to know. She left, and I put my phone face down on the bed and looked at the curtain and thought about a woman in dark trousers and a white coat who had come to find out whether she was fine, who had come back, through a curtain, to check on a wound she was not supposed to still have, who had stood there and been honest with a precision that cost her something I could see, and she was not going to name. Not particularly, she had said. And I was going to be in this ward until tomorrow morning. And she was somewhere in this hospital for the rest of her shift. And there was going to be a corridor, at some point, between the now and the discharge. Something had started moving. I did not have a name for it yet, but it was moving, and it knew where it was going, and I was lying in a hospital bed in London with a healing scar and 5 years of accumulated honesty that I had been giving to my therapist instead of the person it belonged to. Tomorrow morning felt suddenly both very far away and not nearly far enough. Hospital nights are designed, philosophically, if not intentionally, to prevent sleep. The soft percussion of call bells, footsteps, nurses doing handovers at 11 and 3. I lay in the narrow bed with the car park light leaking in, and I did not sleep. I was lying in a hospital in the same city as Rowan Ellery, who had come to my ward on her lunch break to find out whether she was over me and discovered that she was not. Not particularly. I kept coming back to those 2 words the way you press a bruise. The most honest thing anyone had said to me in 5 years, and that flatness was its own kind of information. She had come and said the true thing and then left before it could land on her in front of me, which told me something about where her armor still had gaps. I had 2 options. The sensible one, discharge in the morning, go home, call Dr. Osei, process it properly. And the other one, building in my chest with the patient pressure of something deferred for 5 years that had run out of patience. I knew which one I was going to choose. Somewhere around midnight, I fell into a restless half-sleep, in the dream, And I am going to tell you this because it is relevant, because my dreams in the last 5 years have been consistent in their subject matter and inconsistent in their resolution, and what happened that night was different. In the dream, I was in the chapel in Gloucestershire. Not the dressing room, which is where my dreams usually place me, with the mirror and Carrie and the flowers and the specific silence. This time, I was at the front of the chapel, at the altar. And I was the one waiting. And I understood, in the way of dreams, that I had been waiting for a long time. Long enough that the light through the chapel windows had changed from morning to afternoon. Long enough that the flowers in the arrangements on either side were thinking about wilting. And then the door at the back opened, and I turned. And it was Rowan. And she was walking toward me. And she was in the green dress from the fundraiser. Not a wedding dress, just the green dress. And she looked completely ordinary and completely like herself, the way she always did in real life, with the fine lines at the corners of her eyes and the particular quality of settled attention. And when she reached me, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You came back." I woke up at 5:53 in the morning to the sound of the early vitals round and lay in the blue curtain dark with the dream still warm in my chest like something that had just been handed to me and not yet put down. "You came back," she had said, as if the returning were the whole of the thing, as if it canceled the leaving. I knew it didn't. I was not 24 anymore. And I had enough hours in enough therapy chairs to know that a dream is not a resolution, and that the person in the dream was my own mind speaking to me and not Rowan Ellery speaking to me, and that these are not the same thing. I knew all of that. I also knew that I was going to be discharged in a few hours, and that I had something to say to a woman in this building that had been sitting in my chest for 5 years collecting compound interest, and that whatever happened after I said it, the not saying it was no longer an option I could live with. Breakfast trolley at 7:30. Discharge paperwork at 9. A junior doctor checked my wound, said everything looked good. Come back in 2 weeks. Left with the energy of someone running behind on a very long day. I knew I was going to do it anyway. My overnight bag was packed. I signed the discharge paperwork when it came, thanked the ward sister with genuine feeling because the nursing care had been excellent, and that deserved acknowledgement regardless of what else had happened in this building. And then I walked out of the bay and down the ward corridor toward the lifts. I did not find her on the ward corridor, or in the lift, or in the ground floor corridor. I was almost at the main entrance when someone came through a set of double doors to my left. I heard her before I saw her, her footsteps, which I recognized with the unreasonable specificity of someone who has spent 2 years in proximity to a person's particular way of moving, purposeful, even paced. She came through the doors and stopped. I stopped. The corridor continued around us in the normal way of the world, which does not pause for individual reckonings. She was in scrubs again. Blue, not the green of yesterday's theater session, her hair pulled back and her ID on its lanyard. She was carrying a paper cup of coffee. She was looking at me with an expression that was doing its very best to stay professional, and was failing in the specific way that things fail when they have been failing for 5 years, and the scaffolding has finally hit its limit. "You're being discharged," she said. Not a question. "Yes." She looked at the bag on my shoulder, the printed instructions in my hand. She was making a calculation of some kind. I could see it. The slight focus behind her eyes that meant she was deciding something. "How are you feeling?" "Physically, very well," I said. "Otherwise..." I stopped, corrected myself. I had promised myself, somewhere between 5:53 in the morning and the breakfast trolley, that I was not going to do this in the safe version. Otherwise, I've been better, but that's not recent news. A beat of quiet. Someone's trolley wheels rattled past. "Thea." She said my name the way she'd said it on the operating table, carefully, like she was testing the weight of it. "This is not the place to..." I know, I said. And I know whatever I say is 5 years too late by every reasonable measure, but I've been giving what I owe you to my therapist. You deserve to hear it from me. She was very still. The coffee cup was in both hands now, held the way she had held her coffee mug at 6:15 in the morning all those years ago, and the similarity of the gesture did something to the inside of my chest that I did not have a name for, and did not need one. Not here, she said finally. Okay. There's a... She looked down the corridor, calculating. The family room on the second floor is usually empty in the mornings, before afternoon visiting. A pause. If you can manage the stairs? I can manage the stairs. She turned, and I followed her, and neither of us said anything on the stairs, which was a very long silence in a very short distance. And when she pushed open the door of the second-floor family room, it was, as she had said, empty. It was the standard configuration of these rooms: soft chairs, a low table with a box of tissues that was the only honestly useful object in the whole room, a window that looked onto an internal courtyard where someone had planted lavender that was doing its best in the gray morning light. Rowan set her coffee cup on the table and stood near the window with her arms crossed, not defensively. She did not do defensive posture. It was not in her register. But the way you cross your arms when you are holding yourself together and would like your arms to be aware of this task. I set my bag down. I stood on the other side of the low table. I took a breath. 5 years of therapy teaches you to lead with what happened before you start on why. I left, I said, because I was afraid of needing you, not of loving you. I was never afraid of that. What I was afraid of was what needing you meant. What happened if you left? My parents were not reliable in the specific way, where you learn very young that the people who are supposed to stay don't, and the safest response is to leave first. I looked at her face, doing the precise, controlled stillness of someone receiving information before responding. That is an explanation, not a justification. It does not make what I did acceptable. You deserved someone who showed up. The lavender outside was motionless. What my therapist couldn't do, and what I should have done 5 years ago, was say it to you. You are the person it belongs to. I kept it from you because saying it meant standing in front of you and accepting whatever response you had, and I was too afraid to do that. Something in her face was not the consultant's composure, not the flatness of 5 years of practice distance. Something older, something like the particular grief of someone who has been carrying a question for a long time and has just been handed an answer that is too late and too real and too honest all at once. You're right, she said. It belongs to me, and I needed it 5 years ago. I went over everything, every moment I could remember, trying to find where I should have seen it coming. I couldn't find it. That was its own kind of loss. Not just losing you, losing the ability to trust what I thought I knew. Hearing it from her was the specific difference between reading about a place and standing in it. I'm sorry, I said. That is the least adequate sentence in the English language for what I did, and I mean it more than I've ever meant anything. Silence. Rowan looked out the window at the courtyard lavender. She uncrossed her arms. She picked up her coffee cup, looked at it, put it back down without drinking. Small gestures, the visible equivalent of someone sorting through a drawer, looking for the right thing to say and turning over what they find on the way. I moved to Edinburgh, she said at last, because I couldn't be in the same city. It wasn't entirely about you. The fellowship was genuine. The work was important. I'm glad I did it. But the initial reason I said yes when I had said no before, that was about not being somewhere that reminded me of you every time I went to Park Street or walked past the restaurant or saw a charity auction table. A small dry sound that was not quite a laugh. I became extraordinarily good at avoiding charity auctions for about 2 years. Something in my chest both contracted and released at once, which is a contradictory sensation but an entirely accurate description. I'm sorry, I said again, for the auctions. She looked at me sharply and I saw the edge of something, not quite amusement, but the possibility of it. The involuntary flicker of a person who is not ready to be amused, but whose body has not fully received the memo. It lasted 1 second, and then settled back into the careful gravity of the room. When I came to your ward yesterday, she said, I told myself it was about closure, that I would go. I would confirm that I was professionally able to do my job, that I was stable with regard to. She paused. That I was able to see you and maintain appropriate distance, and that would be the evidence I needed to know I was over it. And instead, I said, I came back through a curtain and told a woman recovering from surgery that I was not, in fact, fine. She said this with a quality that was somewhere between clinical self-assessment and something much more raw. Which is not my best professional decision. I'm glad you did. She looked at me. I'm glad, I said, because it was the first honest thing that has passed between us in 5 years, and it came from you. And I think you knew what you were doing when you came through that curtain. I don't think you came for closure. I think you came because you needed to know if there was still something here, and you weren't going to ask me directly because asking me directly would have required a different kind of bravery than walking through a curtain. And this... I gestured at the family room, the low table, the two of us on either side of the tissue box. This is me asking you directly. Is there? The word dropped into the room and sat there. Rowan was very still. She was looking at me the way she had looked at me in the fundraiser, standing next to the auction table when I had made her laugh for the first time and she had taken note of it. That quality of complete arrival, the sense that she had committed the full weight of her attention to this moment and was not dividing it with anything else. Thea, she said. Very quietly. I know, I said. I know what I'm asking. I know what I put you through, and I know there is no guarantee that what I'm describing is something you want or something you trust. I know that I forfeited every right to this conversation 5 years ago. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to pretend the last 5 years didn't happen. I'm asking if there is anything left that either of us is supposed to do something with. Because I walked out of a chapel, and I have regretted it every day. And I do not want to walk out of this room and have it be the second time I left you without saying the true thing. Something moved across her face. The same thing I had seen in the anesthetic room, in the 6 seconds before she spoke, when the practice distance had shown its limit. But this time, she did not press it flat. This time, she let it stay. You were never a trivial thing to me, she said. That was the part that made it so hard. The sentence landed with the disproportionate weight of something that had been true for a very long time and had not been said aloud until now, and I felt it the way you feel cold water in summer, suddenly and completely and with the particular shock of something that is not a surprise at all. I did not say anything. I just looked at her, because she deserved to be looked at when she said it. I need time, she said. I am not able to stand here and tell you that everything is straightforward. It isn't. I spent 5 years building something that functioned without you in it. And it does function. And I am not going to pull it apart in a hospital family room based on one morning. She paused. But I am also not prepared to tell you that there is nothing here, because that would be... Another pause. This one with a different quality. The quality of a word being chosen with precision. That would be inaccurate. Inaccurate. I almost laughed. Not in a way that diminished the moment. In the way that you almost laugh when someone uses the most characteristically themselves word possible at the moment when being themselves is the most devastating thing they can do. Okay, I said. Time is something I can give you. Time is something I owe you, actually, in quantities I have not yet finished calculating. The corner of her mouth moved. Just the left. Just for a moment. We stood there in the family room with the courtyard lavender outside and the sound of the ward somewhere beyond the closed door, and I was aware of the full weight of the 5 years between us. Not as debt alone, not as damage alone, but as something else too. Something that had survived what I had done to it. Something that had apparently been continuing to exist in the bones of both of us without asking our permission. "My number," she said finally. "You don't have it." "No." She picked up her phone from her coat pocket. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned it toward me, showing me the screen where she had opened a new contact, my name already typed in the field, with the careful precision of someone who had decided exactly what they were doing and was doing it anyway. "Put yours in." I took the phone. I typed. My hands were entirely steady, which surprised me, because the inside of my chest was a different situation entirely. I handed it back. She looked at the number. She did not type a message. She put the phone back in her coat pocket and picked up her coffee cup, and this time she drank from it, and I understood that the meeting was moving toward its close, not because the conversation was finished, but because this was as far as either of us could go in a hospital family room on a Thursday morning with her shift resuming and my discharge paperwork in a bag on the floor. "Thea," she said as I picked up the bag. I looked at her. "I'm glad the procedure went well," said in the measured professional voice, with the small particular warmth underneath it that the professional voice could not entirely conceal, the warmth of someone who cared whether you were all right and was not going to pretend otherwise even when pretending would have been easier. "Thank you," I said, for I stopped. What she had done in that anesthetic room, on that operating table, was something I was going to think about for a long time. The steadiness of it, the professionalism of it. The fact that she had walked into that room knowing exactly who was on the trolley and had done her job with the full capability and care she brought to every patient, because that was who she was, and because the oath she had taken was about harm and not about history. "For what you did this morning. Yesterday morning. For doing your job when you had every reason to arrange it differently." She shook her head just slightly. "I wouldn't have done that." "I know," I said. "That's what I'm thanking you for." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked at the window, at the lavender, at the gray morning doing its level best out there. And she said, very quietly, to the window, or to me, or to both of us equally, "I used to be very good at math. Adding things up, calculating what made sense." I waited. "You were never the thing that made sense," she said, "but you were also never the thing I could add my way out of." I walked out of St. Anselm's Hospital into a Thursday morning in London that was cool and grey and ordinary in every visible respect. The street had its normal Thursday morning quality. The buses and the cyclists, and the people with coffee cups and the particular compressed efficiency of a city that has been doing this long enough to not think about it. I stood on the pavement outside the main entrance for a moment with my bag on my shoulder and the discharge instructions in my hand and a number I had just given to someone I had been in love with for 7 years, and I thought about math. I thought about the things that don't add up, the things you can't calculate your way out of, the things that survive 5 years and a chapel in Gloucestershire, and the particular cruelty of a letter that explains nothing and apologizes for everything, and a Tuesday morning at 6:15, when someone says "I love you" over a coffee, they are already forgetting to drink. And what it means that those things survive, and whether survival is its own kind of argument. I called Dr. Osei's office from the pavement. Got the voicemail, which I expected at 9:30 on a Thursday. Left a message that said, "I need to book an appointment for next week. Something happened and I want to tell you about it in person. I'll explain when I see you." I did not explain more than that. Dr. Osei would understand, and she would have things to say, and I needed to hear them in person, in the chair in her office with the interesting earrings and the fern that judged us both. I needed to do the work of it properly, not in a voicemail. I walked to the bus stop. I sat down. Around me, the Thursday continued in its normal registers. Someone's earphones too loud with a song I didn't recognize. A woman eating a croissant with the focused dedication of a person who had not eaten breakfast and was correcting this seriously. A man with a newspaper whose headlines I could see were the usual variety of alarming and irrelevant. The bus came. I got on. It was 8 days before she texted. 8 days of Dr. Osei, who listened without interrupting and then asked how I felt. Like someone who did the thing they were afraid to do and didn't know yet what it meant, I said. She said not knowing yet was not the same as it not meaning anything. I should acknowledge what I'd done without immediately qualifying it. I acknowledged it. I immediately qualified it. She raised an eyebrow. I stopped. The text came on a Wednesday evening at 7:43. I have been thinking about what you said. I don't have a conclusion yet. But I thought you should know that I've been thinking. I thought you should know. The same architecture as the morning at 6:15. The bare fact of the other person being informed as its own form of care. I texted back. Thank you for telling me. I'm glad you're thinking. My friend Gemma, who I told the full story 2 weeks later, said, 5 years of guilt for 2 years of love? The maths are extremely unflattering. She was right. But it was more than guilt. It was for the green dress and the auction table and the rain. For the way she said, I thought you should know. I walked out of that chapel and I never stopped. Dr. Osei reminded me, at each telling, that hope was not a plan. She said it with the warmth of someone paying attention to the way my face looked when I talked about a woman in a green dress. 6 weeks after the hospital, she called. Friday evening, 8 o'clock. Hello, I said. Hello, she said. A pause, comfortable in the way of pauses between people who know that quiet means something. I went to the fundraiser, the same charity. They do it every year. The cottage? No one bought the cottage this year, she said. I checked. Something happened in my chest, warm and ridiculous and completely unmanageable. Are you telling me this because you wanted someone to bid on it? I'm telling you, she said, because I stood next to the auction table for an hour thinking about a woman trying not to spill her coffee, and I thought it was information you should probably have. I thought you should know. The same careful architecture, the same gift. Rowan, I said. Yes. Can I take you to dinner? A pause. Not long, not calculated. The kind of pause that is the sound of someone who has already made the decision arriving at the moment of saying it. Yes, she said. I think so. We went the following Saturday. Park Street Italian. She had not been back in 5 years. I had never been. Corner booth, low warm light, 4 hours and 7 years of accumulated everything between us on the tablecloth. Edinburgh and what it had cost her. My work and where it had taken me. The things we had each become in the years apart, which was a great deal, and was not disorienting but clarifying, like seeing a painting you thought you knew in better light. She had been on 2 dates in 5 years. I had been on 3. Neither of us needed to say why neither had gone anywhere. I owe you an apology, I said, for measuring everything against you without telling you I was doing it. For 5 years? For 5 years. The left corner of her mouth moved, simultaneously very romantic and genuinely inconvenient of you. Stop apologizing, she said. I know what you're sorry for. I always knew. I just needed to know that you knew it too. I looked at her across the table, at the fine lines and the dark hazel eyes and the way she had held her wine glass all evening, with the same quality of settled presence she brought to everything, the sense that she was entirely where she was. I thought about math, about the things that don't add up, About a woman who goes to a charity fundraiser every year and checks whether the cottage is on the table and stands there for an hour thinking about someone who is trying not to spill their coffee. I'm glad you went to the fundraiser, I said. I go every year, she said. I have since the year after. She looked at the table briefly, then back at me. I told myself it was for the charity, which it also was. The charity is very good. Of course. But also She paused. This was a rarer pause for her, the kind that meant she was going somewhere she had not fully mapped yet. I think I kept going because I wanted to stand next to the auction table and remember that there was a time when someone stood next to me there and made me laugh, and that it had been real, and that real things don't. She stopped. Don't what? I said, very quietly. She looked at me. They don't uncountable themselves, she said, just because they ended badly. I reached across the table. I put my hand on hers, where it rested beside her wine glass, and she looked at our hands for one moment with the expression of someone receiving a thing they had not realized they had been waiting for. And then she turned her hand over, and her fingers closed around mine, and that was the whole of it. No drama. No announcement. The quiet claiming of two people who had been circling a true thing long enough to finally be ready to stand in it. We sat like that for a while. The restaurant noise continued around us, the gentle Italian evening of it, the clatter and the low voices and the smell of bread and wine and good olive oil, and none of it touched us particularly. I need you to know something, I said at some point later, with her hand still in mine. What I told you in that family room, about the fear, about the pattern, the reasons I left. I've done the work on it. I'm not done. Dr. Osei would be the first to tell you I'm not done, and she would be right. But I know what it was, and I know what I am doing differently, and I am not standing here offering you the same person who walked out of a chapel. She's still in here. She'll probably always be in here. But she doesn't get to drive anymore. Rowan was quiet for a moment. She looked at our joined hands on the table. I know, she said. I've thought about this. The version of you who walked out of the chapel was 24 and frightened, and had not yet learned the name for what she was frightened of. That is, I understand it. I don't need you to keep apologizing for it. She looked up. What I need is what you said in the family room. The honesty, even when it's inconvenient, even when you're afraid of what I'll do with it. Yes, I said, that I can do. I know, she said. You did it in a hospital corridor to a woman you hadn't spoken to in 5 years. The bar gets easier from there. The left corner of her mouth was doing the thing it did. I watched it with the specific feeling of someone who has been looking at something from a distance for a very long time and has finally been allowed to look at it close up, and it is exactly what they remembered, and better, and entirely worth the wait. The bar, I said, will never be easy with you. You ask too many good questions. You answer them well, she said. That's the relevant variable. We left the restaurant at 11. The street outside was mild in the way of late summer London evenings, the city warm and lamp-lit and full of people who were also ending their Saturdays in restaurants, and the air had that particular quality it gets in the evening, loose and a little golden, the working day given up, the weekend doing its best. She walked next to me, and we were not holding hands in the street yet. That was still a few inches of distance away, but the inches felt like a decision rather than a gap, and I was not in any hurry that I did not trust. The follow-up appointment, I said. The surgeon, 2 weeks. Yes, she said. Your wound should be healing well by now. It is. I paused. Are you going to be there? I'm an anesthesiologist, she said. Follow-up appointments are not typically my domain. That's not a no. She glanced at me sideways with an expression that was doing several things at once. Amused, exasperated, fond, considering. I could be. In the building, if I happened to be finishing a morning list. In the corridor? Possibly. In the family room, if it was empty? She stopped walking. I stopped walking. We were on the pavement in the lamp-lit London evening with the restaurant behind us and the city ahead, and 7 years of the two of us in the air between us. All of it. The fundraiser and the green dress and Park Street in the rain, and February at 6:15, and Gloucestershire in May and Edinburgh, and an operating table and a family room with courtyard lavender outside the window, and a text at 7:43 on a Wednesday, and a charity auction and an Italian restaurant, and this moment, this pavement, this particular evening. She looked at me. I looked at her. "Rowan," I said. "Yes," she said, quietly. Not answering a question, the word a complete sentence on its own, meaning something larger than its single syllable, something that sounded, in the lamp-lit air of a London street, like the beginning of an answer to every question I had been asking for 5 years. I reached for her hand. She let me take it. We stood there on the pavement and I thought about all the things that don't add up. The things you can't calculate your way out of. And I thought about a woman who goes to a charity fundraiser every year and checks whether the cottage is on the table. And I thought about what it means to stand next to a person and let yourself be completely where you are. And I thought that the thing about real things is that they are stubborn. They stay present in you. They wait in the bones of you, patient as the sea in Pembrokeshire, and they do not uncountable themselves just because they ended badly, and they do not lose their color just because you put them in a locked room, and they do not stop being true. I had walked out of a chapel 5 years ago, and I had spent 5 years learning why. And I had walked back into a hospital and been honest on an operating table and in a corridor and in a family room with courtyard lavender. And she had gone to a fundraiser every year with a question she had not yet stopped asking. And we were standing on a pavement in London with our hands together, and the evening around us, and nothing resolved, and everything beginning. I looked at her face. I was not going to leave this time. Some things you know with your whole self, not the frightened part that calculates the exit, the other part, the part that was there on Park Street in the rain, and at 6:15 with the coffee, and that never left the chapel in Gloucestershire, even when I did. The part that knew, from the first time she laughed and the chin came up and the eyes closed for just a second, that there was no calculating out of this, no reasonable route away from it, no version of the math that ended anywhere else. She squeezed my hand once, the brief certain pressure of someone making a statement without needing to make it in words. I squeezed back, and we walked.